Emile Durkheim was the first French academic sociologist and one of the founding fathers of the discipline of sociology. Durkheim stands out as sociology's most successful founder, not only because he established the field in elite university system in France, but also because he gave it enough of methods and intellectual content so that it could be built upon as earlier. Durkheim is the archetypical sociologist because institutionally he had to be most conscious what would make sociology a distinctive science in its own right. Durkheim was born in the French province of Lorraine. His father was a rabbi, descendant from a long line of rabbis. Durkheim planned to become a rabbi himself. He attended a rabbinical school to prepare. As a young man, he became interested in Catholicism and then turned away from anything other than scholarly interest in religion. However, he incorporated religion into his sociological works. Durkheim last major work was The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, was published in the 1912, remains an important work on sociology of religion. Durkheim was devoted to academics. He worked throughout his life to establish sociology as an academic discipline. He held the first four professorships in social sciences in France. As one biographer says, Durkheim did more to inculcate a sociological perspective across the spectrum of academic discipline than any other figure, with a possible exception of Karl Marx. He also devoted his career to construct a scientific sociological system, not as an end in itself, but as a means for the moral direction of society. From this purpose, Durkheim never departed. He traveled to Germany, where he was impressed by scientific research he observed. In 1889, Durkheim established and became the editor of the scholarly sociology journal La Sociologie, emphasizing the importance of the methodological research. He was convinced that the journal, by its scope and scholarship, could do more for the establishment of sociology in any single work. In the decade immediately following the establishment of the journal, Durkheim produced three of his most famous works: The Division of Labor Society in 1964, originally a work of 1893, and The Rules of Sociological Methods, published in 1964, original work of 1895's work, and The Last Society, got the Seaside, which was published in 1966, original work of 1897. Durkheim is the most influential figure in the development of academic sociology. Following a conventional philosophical training, he moved decisively away from the philosophy which he saw as a tool for remote from the big issues of the day, and towards social science, which he perceived to be closer to make it clear what were the main moral questions facing the French society. Durkheim's first academic position was at the University of Bordeaux, where he taught sociology and education and pedagogy. When he was at Bordeaux, he published widely and was the first French scholar to be promoted to a professor of social sciences. In the 2002, Durkheim's reputation took him to the prestigious Sorbonne, the University of Paris, and in 1906 he became professor of the science of education. 7 years later, Durkheim became the first ever professors of science and education and sociology in French society. Sociology finally had a foothold within the academic establishment in France. The second aspect of the Durkheim's influence of the moral sociology was in relation of the nature of the discipline itself. Durkheim saw that the study of basically a study of social phenomena was needed whenever research into people's actions went beyond their individual interaction. Social institutions, social forms, such as social movements, the family, all live particular individuals inhabit them, and therefore must have a reality of their own. The reality cannot adequately be understood by an individualistic psychology or abstract philosophical speculations, but demands a genuinely sociological explanation. In Durkheim's terms, what we call the social in its level of reality and in its own rights that cannot be reduced to mere actions, nor is it a simple aggregate of individuals' consciousnesses. This explains why Durkheim focused on the group phenomena and the social factors, such as the comparative suicide rates, social solidarity, and the religion. In his views, the psychology of individuals was not the proper subject of sociologists to study. Thus, one example of this perspective can be seen as the Division of Labor and Society of 1893. Walter Keynes outlined his now famous distinctions between the mechanical forms of solidarity found in the less complex societies and the organic solidarity that characterizes the large-scale, modern, and industrial societies. Mechanical solidarity exists when individuals and individualism is minimized and individual is summed up within the collectivity. By contrast, organic solidarity is generated by the extensive division of labor within the industrial societies, which tends to produce differences rather than similarities. Durkheim therefore rejected the idea common at that time, and since the moral industrialism is inevitably destroyed the social solidarity and threatens the social fabric of society. In fact, said Durkheim, stronger bonds of mutual interdependence are created under organic forms of solidarity, which hold out the potential for a balance between individual differences and collective purposes. Here, we can see how Durkheim's scientific sociological analysis is closely tied to the moral and social problems of the day. How can industrial societies hold together in an age of increasing individualism? Durkheim's approach to sociology is known as functionalism, or the functional approach, the study of society and the way its institutions are connected together and change, the social change. And though functionalism has been very influential in sociology, today it is retreated. There are several reasons why. First reason, many critics have argued that functionalism is good at explaining consciousness why societies hold together and share a common morality, but it is much less able to explain conflict and radical social. That's why I later developed by social conflict. Others argue that Durkheim's functionalism seems to preach society's constraints over people and does not allow enough room for the creative actions of individuals. Finally, functional analysis tends to impute purposes and meet the societies itself. For example, we might say that the function of the education system is to train young people for the needs of modern society. This functionalist argument seems to suggest that societies can have needs in the same way that people do. But is this really an adequate form of explanation? Modern academies may require well certain skills, but is the present education system the only or even the best way to provide for them? What we really want to know is how exactly the modern education system came into being. How did it develop over time as its present form? And could things have been different? Functionalism does not prioritize such questions. In the 1914s, 50s, and 60s, versions of functionalist theories, structural functionalism became the central paradigm of sociology. Although the perspective was never totally dominant, it is hard for students of today who may be used to the idea that sociology as a discipline is an inevitable, pluralistic, argumentative, and theoretically diverse. To appreciate just how different doing sociology was at the same time. Sociology and the structural functionalism was often seen as one and the same thing. Two American sociologists particularly stands out during this period, Robert Merton and his mentor Talcott Parsons. Parsons combined the ideas of the Durkheim, Weber, and Wilfredo Pareto into his own brand of structural functionalism, which began from the so-called problem of the social error. This problem has how societies can hold together. Then all the individuals within it are self-interested and pursue their own wants and needs, often at the expense of others. Well, philosophers like Thomas Hobbes answer this by saying that the emergence of the modern state with all its policies and military powers was a crucial factor. The state protected all individuals from one another and from the external enemies, but in return, citizens were required to accept the state's legitimate right to exercise its powers on people. An informal contract exists between state and individuals. Talcott Parsons rejected this solution. He saw that people's conformity to social rules was not simply produced through the negative fears of punishment. Instead, people conformed in a positive way, teaching other societies moral rules and norms and behavior. Such positive commitments to an orderly society show, says Parsons, the social rules are not merely an external force acting on individuals, but have become internalized by the continual process of socialization. Society does not simply exist out there, but exists in here as well. Having established the primary of the premises of sociological understanding of social order, Parsons turns his attention to the functioning of the social system itself. To do this, he devised a model based on the identifying the needs of the system, known as AGIL paradigm. Parsons argued that if a social system is to continue, then there are four basic functions it must perform. First, it must be capable of adapting to its environment and gather enough resources to do so. Second, it must set out and put out in place goals to be attained and the mechanisms for the achievement. Third, the system must be integrated and in various subsystems must be coordinated effectively. Finally, the social system must have ways of preserving and transmitting its values and culture to the next generations. In less abstract form, Parsons saw the economic subsystems are performing an adaptive function. The political subsystem as acting setting society goals and means of attaining them. The community subsystem or the societal community as doing integratively work and educational subsystems along with other socializing agencies as transmitting culture and values. The latency function, clearly, a person's structural functionalism was form of system theories which tended to give priority to the overall system as needs. But it was always vulnerable to the charge that it overemphasized the consensus and agreements, while paying less attention to fundamental conflicts or interests and soft skills interactional processes through which social order and disorder are produced and reproduced. The thoughts of solving these problems passed to his mentor, Robert K. Merton, who pursued various versions of Parsons functionalism, but did so in a much more critical way. As we have already noted, that Merton saw that while many sociological studies focus on either the macro level of society as a whole or the micro level of society, the social interaction, this polarization had failed to fill in the gap between macro and the micro levels. To rectify this, Robert Merton argued from middle range theories in particular areas or specific subjects. An excellent example from his own work is his study of working class criminality and deviance. Criminality and deviance. He set out to explain why there was so much acquisitive crime among the working classes. His explanation was that in an American society which promotes the cultural goals of material success but offers very less legitimate opportunities for lower social class groups, working class criminality represented an adaptation to the social circumstances that many young people found themselves in. But the fact that they aim to achieve the kind of material success to system promoted also meant that these people were not evil or incapable of being reformed. Rather, it was the structure of the social life that was in need of reform. This thesis shows that Merton did not simply follow the Parsons versions of functionalism, but actually try to develop it into new directions. In doing so, this perspective moved closer to conflict theories. It distinguished between manifest and latent functions. The former are observable consequences of actions, the latter are those aspects that remained unspoken. In studying latent functions, Merton argues we can learn much more about the ways the society works. For example, we might observe a rain dance among the tribal people in Africa, but the manifest function which appears to bring about rain, but if we look deeper, we may find that the rain dance often fails and yet continue to be practiced because its latent function is to be built and sustain group solidarity, the mechanical solidarity, where the functional aspect of society is institutions and legitimate forms of behavior. Merton argued that these also contain certain dysfunctional elements. This existence of dysfunctional allows Merton to discuss a potential for conflicts within the society and ways Parsons did not. What became of structural functionalism? This was the functionalism that following the death of Talcott Parsons, Jeffrey Alexander sought to revisit and revive the approach, aiming to tackle theoretical flaws to make it more useful, more realistic in sociology. But in 1997, even Alexander was forced to conceive that internal contradiction of new functionalism mean that it was totally finished. Instead, he argued for the need of construction of sociological theories going beyond the functional perspective. Persinian structural functionalism is, to all intents and purposes, for the time being at least, defunct within the mainstream sociology. Thanks for watching this video. We'll meet in the next lecture.